In an unprecedented escalation of trade tensions, Canada has taken a bold step by effectively blocking the primary overland route connecting the contiguous United States to Alaska. This move comes as a direct response to the recent tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on Canadian goods, marking a significant turning point in U.S. Canada relations. But is Canada truly serious about this blockade, or is it a strategic bluff? Let's dive into the details of this development and its potential ramifications. The genesis of the trade dispute. The roots of the ongoing trade dispute between the United States and Canada can be traced back to early 2025, when President Donald Trump implemented sweeping tariffs on Canadian imports. The policy imposed a 25% tariff on most goods, with energy products facing a slightly lower 10% tariff. The administration justified these measures as a strategy to reduce the U.S. trade deficit while simultaneously pressuring Canada to strengthen its border security against illegal immigration and drug trafficking, particularly the influx of fentanyl. This move was met with swift and forceful retaliation from Canada, which announced its own countermeasures in the form of 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods. These retaliatory tariffs, set to take effect on March 4, 2025, signaled the beginning of a rapidly escalating trade conflict. What initially began as a dispute over economic policies soon evolved into a broader geopolitical standoff, as both nations remained steadfast in their positions. The tit-for-tat escalation quickly spiraled, with neither side willing to back down. Canada's latest retaliatory move, imposing restrictions on access to Alaska, marks a significant turning point in the conflict, raising concerns over the potential impact on regional trade, transportation, and diplomatic relations. As tensions continue to mount, the dispute has drawn international attention, with analysts warning of economic disruptions that could ripple beyond North America. The unfolding situation underscores the delicate balance between economic policy and international diplomacy, with both nations facing mounting pressure to find a resolution before further economic and political consequences emerge. As the trade conflict escalated beyond tariffs and countermeasures, Canada sought new ways to exert economic pressure on the United States. Moving beyond traditional trade policies, Canadian officials began leveraging geographic and infrastructural advantages to disrupt key American supply routes. This shift in strategy marked a significant escalation in the dispute, culminating in one of Canada's most impactful retaliatory measures, targeting the vital transportation corridor that connects the continental U.S. to Alaska. Canada's strategic blockade. In a bold retaliatory move, British Columbia has introduced legislation aimed at imposing tolls on U.S. commercial trucks traveling through the province en route to Alaska. This policy, seen as a direct response to the escalating trade dispute with the United States, strategically targets one of the most crucial transportation corridors between the two nations. By levying fees on American transport vehicles, Canada is effectively increasing the cost of moving goods to and from Alaska, placing economic pressure on U.S. supply chains. The decision reflects Canada's intent to leverage its geographic advantage as a means of countering U.S. trade restrictions, signaling a shift from tariff-based retaliation to infrastructure-based economic tactics. The focal point of this strategy is the Alaska Highway, a 2,450-kilometer route that serves as the primary lifeline for trade between the continental United States and Alaska. Running through British Columbia and Yukon, the highway facilitates the movement of approximately 80% of goods transported to Alaska, making it an essential supply channel for fresh food, electronics, medical supplies, and other critical consumer goods. The imposition of tolls on commercial trucks could have far-reaching consequences, potentially driving up the cost of living in Alaska, straining businesses that rely on imports, and complicating logistics for industries dependent on cross-border trade. Additionally, the blockade raises broader diplomatic concerns, as it underscores the extent to which economic disputes can spill over into regional infrastructure policies. With tensions mounting, the measure threatens to deepen the divide between the U.S. and Canada, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already volatile trade standoff. Economic implications for Alaska. The introduction of tolls on U.S. commercial trucks traveling through British Columbia is poised to have profound economic consequences for Alaska, a state heavily dependent on imports for its survival. With nearly 80% of goods transported to Alaska passing through the Alaska Highway, any disruption to this supply chain threatens to significantly increase shipping costs. As transportation expenses rise, businesses will have little choice but to pass these additional costs onto consumers, driving up the prices of essential goods such as food, electronics, electronics, medical supplies, and household necessities. For many Alaskans, particularly those living in remote and rural areas where prices are already steep due to logistical challenges, this increase could create serious financial hardship. The state's unique geographical isolation makes it especially vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, and higher costs on everyday essentials could further strain the budgets of families and small businesses. Over time, this could contribute to inflationary pressures within the state, widening the economic divide between urban and rural communities and exacerbating existing socioeconomic disparities. Beyond the immediate impact on the cost of living, Alaska's broader economy also stands to suffer, particularly its tourism sector, which is one of the state's most vital industries. Each year, millions of visitors travel to Alaska, with a significant portion arriving via cruise ships that traditionally make stops at Canadian ports before reaching their final destinations. These stops are not only a logistical necessity, but also a legal requirement due to international maritime laws. However, as trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada escalate, there is growing concern that these long-standing travel arrangements could be jeopardized. If diplomatic relations between the two nations deteriorate further, cruise lines may be forced to alter their routes, reducing the number of ships docking in Alaska. This could deal a major blow to local businesses, including tour operators, restaurants, retail stores, and hospitality services that depend on tourism for a substantial portion of their revenue. The economic ripple effects of these disruptions could extend beyond the tourism and retail sectors, impacting employment rates and tax revenues within the state. A decline in tourism revenue would mean fewer jobs in hospitality and service industries, potentially leading to layoffs and reduced consumer spending. Additionally, municipalities that rely on tourism-related tax revenue to fund public services may find themselves facing budget shortfalls, further straining local economies. If the trade dispute remains unresolved, state officials may be forced to explore alternative shipping routes, renegotiate trade agreements, or seek federal assistance to mitigate the financial burden on businesses and residents alike. The growing uncertainty underscores the interconnected nature of trade policies, infrastructure, and regional economies, highlighting the need for a swift and diplomatic resolution before Alaska experiences prolonged economic distress. As the economic strain on Alaska intensifies, the broader ramifications of the trade dispute extend beyond rising costs and disrupted supply chains. What began as an economic conflict has now evolved into a full-blown political standoff, with diplomatic relations between the United States and Canada deteriorating rapidly. The economic hardships caused by the blockade have fueled tensions at the highest levels of government, leading to a war of words between national leaders and complicating any efforts to find a resolution. This escalating dispute is no longer just about tariffs and tolls. It has become a test of political will and international diplomacy. Political repercussions. The implementation of tolls on U.S. commercial trucks traveling through British Columbia has escalated tensions between the United States and Canada, exacerbating an already strained diplomatic relationship. The blockade has become more than just an economic countermeasure. It has evolved into a symbol of the deepening rift between the two nations. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has taken a firm stance, declaring that meaningful bilateral discussions cannot proceed until President Donald Trump ceases what he has described as disrespectful remarks about Canada. This condition for diplomacy has further entrenched the standoff, making negotiations increasingly difficult and delaying any potential resolution to the escalating trade conflict. The political fallout from this dispute extends beyond diplomatic decorum. Both leaders face mounting domestic pressure to defend their respective national interests, complicating any path toward reconciliation. In the United States, President Trump's hardline approach to trade and border security continues to play well with his political base, making it unlikely that he will soften his rhetoric or policy stance in the near future. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Carney must balance the economic consequences of the blockade with the political imperative of standing firm against what many Canadians perceive as unfair U.S. trade policies. His insistence on respect as a prerequisite for negotiations resonates with a Canadian public increasingly wary of American influence and intervention. As the standoff drags on, the absence of high-level diplomatic engagement raises concerns about long-term damage to U.S.-Canada relations. Traditionally one of the world's closest alliances, the partnership between the two nations has been tested by trade disputes in the past. But the current conflict marks a significant departure from the cooperative spirit that has long defined their relationship. The inability to de-escalate tensions could have broader geopolitical consequences, affecting joint military operations, environmental policies, and cross-border infrastructure projects. Without a diplomatic breakthrough, both countries risk not only economic setbacks, but also a lasting deterioration in trust and collaboration, making future cooperation on global issues even more challenging. Is Canada bluffing? While some observers speculate that Canada's actions are a calculated bluff aimed at pressuring the United States into lifting tariffs, the measures taken thus far indicate a serious commitment to defending national interests. Unlike symbolic diplomatic gestures, the introduction of tolls on the Alaska Highway carries real economic consequences. By targeting a critical supply route that facilitates the transportation of essential goods to Alaska, Canada has demonstrated its willingness to escalate the trade dispute beyond conventional tariff retaliation. This move suggests that the Canadian government is not merely posturing, but is prepared to sustain economic pressure to force the U.S. administration into reconsidering its trade policies. Moreover, the decision to impose tolls is not without risk for Canada, further reinforcing the idea that this is not an empty threat. Disrupting cross-border trade could lead to backlash from Canadian businesses that rely on economic ties with the U.S., particularly in industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. However, by taking this bold stance, Prime Minister Mark Carney's administration is signaling that Canada will not be coerced into accepting trade policies it deems unfair. The willingness to endure potential economic fallout in the short term suggests a long-term strategy rather than a bluff, one designed to strengthen Canada's bargaining position while maintaining national sovereignty in economic matters. If the US views Canada's actions as mere posturing, it risks underestimating the severity of the situation. The longer the blockade persists, the greater the economic and political fallout, not just for Alaska, but for broader U.S.-Canada relations. As tensions continue to rise, it remains uncertain whether the United States will respond with further economic countermeasures or seek a diplomatic resolution. However, what is clear is that Canada's actions have already had a tangible impact, making it increasingly difficult to dismiss them as mere negotiation tactics. Global perspective. The escalating trade conflict between the United States and Canada is not occurring in isolation. Rather, it is part of a broader realignment in global trade relations. As tensions between these two North American allies intensify, other nations are also taking note and responding to U.S. trade policies with retaliatory measures of their own. The European Union, for example, has announced tariffs on $28 billion worth of American products in direct response to U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs. This move signals a growing international backlash against protectionist policies and highlights the fragile state of global trade dynamics. With major economies imposing countermeasures, the U.S. finds itself increasingly at odds with long-standing allies, raising concerns over the stability of international economic cooperation. Beyond economic implications, the trade war has the potential to reshape global alliances. Historically, the United States has relied on economic partnerships with Canada, the European Union, and other Western allies to maintain a strong, interconnected trade network. However, as disputes escalate, these relationships are being tested, pushing some nations to explore alternative trade agreements and partnerships. Countries that once relied on U.S. markets may seek stronger economic ties with China, emerging economies, or regional trade blocs to offset potential losses. This shift could diminish U.S. influence in global trade negotiations as competitors step in to fill the void left by strained American alliances. The ripple effects of the U.S.-Canada dispute extend beyond bilateral relations, affecting supply chains, investor confidence, and global market stability. Businesses operating across multiple countries must now navigate an increasingly unpredictable trade environment where tariffs and retaliatory measures threaten to disrupt traditional commerce patterns. As the world watches how this trade standoff unfolds, it remains to be seen whether the U.S. will adjust its trade policies to mend fractured alliances or continue on a path that could further isolate it from key global partners. Regardless of the outcome, the current tensions underscore a broader shift in international trade dynamics, one that could redefine economic relationships for years to come. Conclusion: Canada's decision to impose tolls on U.S. commercial trucks traveling to Alaska marks a significant escalation in an already contentious trade dispute. By targeting a critical transportation artery, Canada has demonstrated that it is willing to go beyond traditional tariff retaliation, directly impacting American supply chains and increasing economic pressure on the U.S. government. This action is far from a mere negotiating tactic. It is a clear statement of Canada's commitment to defending its economic interests and asserting its sovereignty in the face of aggressive U.S. trade policies. As tensions continue to rise, the effectiveness of this strategy remains uncertain, but what is clear is that the economic and political stakes have never been higher. The coming months will be pivotal in determining the trajectory of this dispute. If both sides remain entrenched in their positions, further retaliatory measures could deepen economic turmoil, disrupt industries, and strain diplomatic ties beyond repair. However, there remains an opportunity for de-escalation through high-level negotiations and diplomatic intervention. Whether the two nations can find common ground or allow hostilities to escalate further will shape not only the future of U.S.-Canada relations, but also broader global trade dynamics. As businesses, consumers, and policymakers brace for the potential fallout, the need for strategic dialogue and compromise has never been more urgent.